All right, now am I sharing? Yes, no?
Yes, you are.
Can everybody see? Okay.
Yes,
Thanks.
go ahead, Dan.
So, oh, I'm not used to your pretty slides, Carol. Let me get through this.
I didn't mean for the bill to be there. Oy, oy, oy.
It's all right. It's fun to see you again, right? So, why are we looking at curriculum management? That's probably the first question. And this slide probably demonstrates the issue here in that curriculum management really has a direct impact and is directly related to how we organize down in enrollment, our course offerings, and our program offerings. So to really understand that, it's important to understand curriculum management and some of the key concepts and ideas which have been developed in that area. In so much as program offerings and course offerings really become a big foundation for how enrollment does its business, curriculum management kind of thereby has a very indirect relationship to all of that. So knowing these things is going to be important. So for this discussion, we're going to kind of stay conceptual here. We're not really going to talk about the application. If you're interested in some of the fun bells and whistles and sit and talk about learning objectives all day long, you know, that's a different kind of session. Kuali days will be doing some of that, or ping me offline and I can wax philosophic about them. But we'll probably try to stay focused on... Oops.
We lost your screen for some reason.
Yeah, funny.
Okay, we're back.
We'll try to stick with the main concepts that are going to be important to be thinking about when we tackle enrollment, okay? One of the kind of big foundational issues that is important to really understand curriculum management is this concept of the learning unit. So anybody who's kind of followed Kuali Student for a while has probably seen this as one of these atomic ideas that was developed in part of Kuali Student. And the idea here was to have a way to inventory a component of learning within the system, meaning if we think about a lot of our systems now, they're very oriented towards courses, like, oh yeah, we can manage courses, great. We have programs, we can manage our programs, great, but then these new things pop up and our systems really choke trying to figure out ways to implement them. So one of the key pieces of Kuali Student and curriculum management in particular was making sure to test, validate, and implement this concept of this learning unit, this flexible piece, this flexible component that we can kind of style to support any kind of learning that the institution might want to support. And it's kind of important to think about when thinking about curriculum management, because this is where we're going to see a lot of the flexibility that we want to expose. And some of that flexibility we might talk about a little bit later with Kathy when we talk about services and how we think about, you know, the atomic kind of learning unit idea and how we then express that learning unit in more tangible ways in the application. We think about courses and the programs and the services that support them. So when we think about types of learning units, a lot of work was done in the beginning to at least identify these big categories of learning units. There's more than this, but these are probably the 5 big juggernauts that we're kind of seeing. And each of these are very kind of unique in the way they work. Courses and programs, I probably don't need to talk about a ton. We know what they are, and if you don't, I'm going to talk about them in a couple slides anyway. Projects. These are things like dissertation research, thesis research, independent research that students may be doing, things that we traditionally slam into the course model in terms of deployment, but it doesn't fit well, have all kinds of problems with it, and really we want to be looking at a different way of trying to manage these experiences. They tend to be highly individualized, which kind of breaks the course model. They kind of sometimes are loosely coupled with the idea of a term or a semester in terms of longevity, and they tend to be very independent. Their meaning is very specific to the person, what they're trying to accomplish. So in that effort, we recognize that we want to kind of look at that in a different way, not try to slap that into courses. Credits is always a weird thing with projects. Yeah?
Sorry to interrupt. We had a couple of feedback from the group here. Can you speak up a bit and maybe slow down your pace if possible? Thanks.
I'll move closer to the mic. Okay, so talking about projects some more. My credits is an interesting one to think about with projects like dissertation research. They don't necessarily always apply the same way when we think of a credit hour as a measure of contact. I know at Maryland, when about 10 years ago, we had a faculty committee from the Senate get together to define what a dissertation credit actually meant. After 6 months, they just agreed that they had no clue, nor could they agree on what that clue was even close to. So it is a way of just demonstrating that we need a different kind of model. The course model doesn't work. Experiential learning is another kind of big group. We're talking about here like internships, externships, practica, life experience. These elements we also tend to, in our systems, try to stick into course types objects, but in many ways what we need is different. The information we need is different. We're looking at more about information about where the source is, who's managing them on site, what's that address, how are we relating that, who's the faculty member within the institution who has oversight over the learning in the end. You know, there's all kinds of elements how they might link, and they operate differently than the course model. Examinations and competencies were another big area, and in this we're thinking about, you think about your comprehensive exams, your competency exams, your music juries. These are things where it's an exam run by the institution and it has an outcome that we need to store, but we need to manage that better. Especially when we start thinking about programs such as managing a doctoral program. Once you dive into it, there's a lot more than courses that go into defining a doctoral program. There are examinations which are critical to completion and tracking through that program. So those are another learning units that we're looking at. So having spoken about learning units, we can kind of get back to what curriculum management is all about. And for curriculum management, we're really looking at the system that allows one to kind of create, manage these learning units, be they courses, programs, throughout your system. Currently right now we're looking at more courses and programs in our current product. The other big element, of course we can do collaboration workflow to support individuals building and proposing those elements. But a big goal in curriculum management was not just being kind of what our legacy systems sometimes already have. Like most of our systems already have an element which allows us to kind of manage what our course objects are, what are our programs that we offer, how do we get them exposed to the catalog, and how do we use those as ways of constraining how we then offer those things to our institution. We have that, but what we're really looking at curriculum management is more of a way to help the curriculum manager, his or herself, understand the curricula of the institution, both from an institutional perspective, in your provostial level, down to your department, and even eventually down to a student perspective as they might come to look at these things. And one of the ways that we tried to do that in getting at least a baby step in some of the vision of Kuali and understanding relationships and looking at information across systems is working with dependencies. Dependency analysis is a piece that is in the current product, and through this, the goal here is to allow somebody to understand their curriculum more than they would before. Like, we can still see a course that we might own and see what its prerequisites are and elements like that, but we can't always have a good understanding of how other curricula within the institution utilize that thing in a different way. So for instance, I sometimes tell people if you're going to go look and play in the staging application, you know, play with dependency analysis, which is using some of Maryland data, and type in Math 140. You'll get a good description showing, this particular calculus course is used as a prerequisite in the following 15 courses. It's used as a program completion requirement in these 8 programs. So it really helps the institution understand how curricula relate to one another. And that's a big goal of curriculum management. One of the key concepts to think about when we talk about learning units is this concept of the canonical learning unit. Here comes fun terminology. And we kind of call the learning unit instance. And course is probably the easiest way to demonstrate that division. If we think about the canonical with course, we're really talking about the catalog version of your course. This is the one that you put out your annual catalog, which has all your programs and all the courses which the institution owns in its inventory. Has nothing to do with offering. These are the products of the institution that we currently have and are active within our school. And those are displayed, and that's what curriculum management focuses on managing. The other side of that is the actual instance of that canonical course. So in this case, kind of call it the course offering. So if I might have English 206, for example, that's my Shakespeare course. It was probably approved in 1952. It's probably gone through many versions as they've updated the description over time. But it's an active course that we've kind of had for a long time. But then in each actual semester, we're going to offer that thing. So we're going to take that thing and offer it in the spring 2012 semester. And that's going to have a time, it's going to have a place, and it's going to have an instructor. And that becomes the offering or the instance of that particular canonical. And that's an important spread to be thinking about as we start playing with curriculum management and we start playing with enrollment. Because enrollment's going to be the land of the course offering. That's about the instance. That's what students will actually register for. You don't register for the catalog version of the course that's sitting up there. I realize I talk with my hands a lot, but it's kind of weird in this kind of call because I can't tell who can see me or not. Oh well, I'll just talk at my computer screen, see if that works.
I can see you.
Well, that's good. At least you're entertained. All right, so let's jump forward a little bit. So let's talk a little about types of courses that have been thought through. This is just a collection of things. Credit courses is the one that's currently being used in the application. These are kind of our traditional courses. We also have identified the concept of non-credit courses, which in some respects is a bit of a catch-all, because we're talking in some respects in there. We have training types of courses identified, which usually have no academic parts of it whatsoever. We have some of the more extended education courses, which are non-credit, where often they're not about academic styles, but they're the ways in which departments sometimes package learning into non-accredited versions that they might offer to businesses or other types of companies that have to be managed or offered. Some of these might be associated with CEUs, continuing education units, and other kinds of outcomes that may be different than the classic academic credit model. Special topics courses is an important one that still needs some work to see in curriculum management, and that is, we think about, you might have special topics in linguistics. That's something that's often stored at your catalog layer, but then in each semester, the department will dynamically indicate what kind of topic they're going to teach in that semester as it relates to a particular faculty member who's on staff for that semester who might be visiting. It might be in response to current issues going on, but it's not something that goes through the full, huge Senate course approval process that's related to that. And it could be a lot. You could have that one course which might shoot out 50 unique topics in a particular semester, of which maybe one of those would ever be taught again. And many of our institutions have certain mechanisms about how we control the frequency of a particular kind of offering. But there's a lot of complexity there. There's also been identified these various topics kinds of courses. So these actually do have meaning. It could be Shakespeare. But the means by which those learning outcomes and learning objectives are achieved are through different targeted topics. An example I sometimes use is we have a Music of World Cultures as a course taught in our ethnomusicology department, and you will learn the same thing in each course, but the target by which you learn it differs. So one semester, they're going to use Japan, China, India, and the Pacific Islands as the means by which you learn those ideas about world cultures. The next semester, it's the same course, but they're going to go and they're going to aim it more at North America, Africa, and Europe. So it's still the same course, it just has different ways in which they're going to achieve those goals. A couple other weird ones we had were modular courses. These are courses in which they really are unique, separate modules that might be offered at various different times. And through the completion of a certain set of those, one actually achieves the completion of a course. Those could be across semesters, it could be within one semester. There might be 10 modules, you're required to complete 3 of those modules. Upon completion, you achieve the course's completed credit. And we have something we call sequence courses. These are courses that span multiple semesters, so it might be actually a year-long course, but it's deployed across 2 or 3 terms, but that sequence is tightly coupled, meaning those students do traverse together across those semesters. And at the end, that grade accounts for all of that work that was accumulated through the span of, say, 3 semesters. So this gives you some idea of some of the courses we've been looking at. Now I want to talk about some of the concepts we've dealt with in course, and I guess I would pause to say we're about to encounter some interesting vocabulary. Across this project since we started many years ago, vocabulary is actually more of an obstacle for us working together than actually the processes which we're trying to represent. It's been a big lesson we've learned. We come to the table with all kinds of terminology, but in the end, once we analyze it all, we recognize often that we're all talking about the same thing. So I would say as I go through some of these elements of terminology, take a look at what it's talking about and then think how that might apply to your institution. You might have, and probably do, a different term for this, or it might be used in a different way, so don't freak out if you see a term that's being used completely differently where you're from. One of those concepts is what we've called cross-listing. This actually was a difficult term to nail down because it's one of the more loosely used words across not only in our institutions, but across our institutions, meaning I know at Maryland I put the term cross-list out and I'll get 18 different answers depending on if I'm talking to a department or a faculty member or a student or a scheduling officer. But how we've defined it in Kuali is a single course that is being offered under 2 or more different subject codes and numbers, meaning it has different identifiers for it. So a good example of that, we have a social gender course. Well, you can take it under Soc 325 or Women's Studies 325. It's the same course, same title, same description, same learning objectives. It is the same course. And in Kuali, as opposed to our current legacy systems, we've modeled that as a single object with 2 titles to it. And I should say 2 identifiers. It has 2 prefixes and course numbers to it. But that's very different than our legacy systems. Our legacy systems, for most of us, model that as 2 courses which we link together, typically in our course offering layer in enrollment. So that's one thing that I want to make sure that everybody hears about as we start to play with enrollment. The second dynamic is joint offering. With joint offering, it's a little bit different. These are actually 2 independent courses. They have unique learning objectives, but they are similar enough that they may often be taught together in the same room with the same instructor. The most common example of that, though it happens in other situations, the most common example are the undergraduate, graduate versions of a course, in which the undergraduates will be learning something appropriate to their level, but the graduate students are in that same class, participating in the same discussions, but they're accomplishing other bits of information. Either they're doing additional work, or in some cases, we have a lot of examples where sometimes the graduate students are actually teaching portions of that class. That's how they link these things together. But those relationships are important to keep together because there's often issues about continual credit accumulation across both of those experiences for a single individual. So those are tracked in that way. And I give an example down there of a Russian example that we've seen before, where you can see the undergraduates are learning about the study of the Russian language in terms of the verbal aspects, and the graduate students are working more on the analysis side of it. So they have slightly different learning objectives. How's my time?
You're fine. You're fine. You have 20 minutes.
Oh, good. Thanks, Carol and Mike. The next piece to think about is activities. So for courses, especially in curriculum management, we have the ability to define the activities which they will utilize. So for instance, if I'm going to offer the English 206 course in curriculum management, I can indicate what activities that will be composed of. Will that be composed of lecture? Will I compose that of, say, maybe 2-part lecture, 1-part lab? Will it be lecture and discussion? You can actually create that in Kuali Student, in curriculum management, I should say. The formats are kind of what we call that combination of activities. So for English 206, if I said I'm going to use, say, per week 2 credit hours of lecture, 1 credit hour recitation, that combination becomes a course format. And in curriculum management, you can create multiple course formats. So for instance, if you have a need to indicate very discreetly the different ways you may teach it. So for instance, say, well, in some terms, I teach English 206 as simply straight up lecture, 3 credits per 3 hours per week. You can set that up in curriculum management and then create a second format to perhaps deal with another kind of semester that you sometimes deploy, where you deploy recitation. And you can create another format that will have that activity combination in there and manage them that way. Different institutions constrain their course offerings in different ways. So for Maryland, we don't constrain quite in that model, but we can easily use those things to kind of meet our needs. And I think in the same case, for those institutions that really do keep tight constraints over that, the system supports that as well. So it's got some flexibility with that. Course sets. I'll just mention course sets because most people look at curriculum management and they hear course sets and they all just collectively go, huh? So course sets really came from the creation of rules. If anybody's looked at curriculum management and played, there's the ability to build rules, including your prerequisite rules, your restriction rules. And to do that, you often have to indicate the courses that you're going to require for it. So that creates the need to add your courses to it. And anytime we have a rule statement we're building and we're putting more than one course in it, for instance, prerequisite might be that I require this particular course, Math 110. Great, it's not a course set. But if I say, well, you need to take one of these 5 courses, I need to identify those 5 courses into that rule statement, that becomes a course set. And we have different kinds of course sets. We have the regular course set, which is the kind of basic one that's built for any rule, anytime you use a combination. We also have things called dynamic course sets. These are course sets that aren't based about the objects you define, but are based on the criteria you define that makes them up. For instance, you might say that you need 6 credits of social work in the 300 to 400 level course range. You can create that rule, and it will dynamically at all times display what that means in the curriculum management system. So if you add a new 400 level course, in 5 minutes, that rule automatically knows how to update that and will relate that information to you. So that's more of a dynamic course set. The ones that you will see in curriculum management, say you're looking on the landing page, are more named course sets. These are course sets that go across multiple rule statements. So for instance, you might have engineering. We have 15 different engineering programs and majors, but there's a common base set of 4 courses that all engineers take. It's a foundation of engineering and used in a lot of course requirements and used also in some program requirements. With a named course set, you can actually build that course set and govern that, and then any of those rules, you can simply attach it. You can simply attach that course set to that rule. So I want to say, well, you need 1 course out of the foundational engineering series. You can simply do that without, for every single course, which might be 25 courses, say, let me find those 5 or 6 courses and attach them in, and those become the named course sets. So just tuck that away from when you're playing with curriculum management. Of course. So now talk about program a little bit. So program is another big vocabulary issue. It has been a vocabulary issue because you ask somebody, what programs do you offer? Most institutions have different ways they slice that up. Some people go, oh, that's a Bachelor of Science in Engineering, and some go, well, no, that's our electrical engineering, and some say it's some subset of that. So we kind of agreed that, when we say program, we kind of mean small p program, not big P program, meaning it's really about the atomic idea of it. And this is really, it's kind of a group of learning units that lead to some recognized body of knowledge. So meaning you've got a group of activities or courses or things being used together, and by completing those, you've accomplished something. Whether that's a degree, it could simply be an acknowledgement that you've completed it. Some of us, it could just be a notation. It's just something that's quantifiable at the end. It can be relatively flexible. A program might be highly regimented. If we think about, say, executive MBA program, Or it could be very loosely coupled. A program might consist of completing 4 or 5 colloquia and completing a paper at the end. That might actually constitute a particular kind of program. So thinking about types of programs, blue is just an indication that these are things that are currently in curriculum management. The others are not. We have the concept of baccalaureate, master's, doctoral, professional programs. We have general education course, especially undergraduate programs typically have some kind of general education component that's part of the requirement of earning a baccalaureate. We have our majors. So these are our social majors, our English. These are the particular requirements and programs that are specific to that discipline. Within majors, we have specializations. So for one major, it might actually have 4 sub-specializations within that major that a person can be associated with. The concept of minors are there. Most of our campuses have some concept of minors. There are a variety of certificates that have been identified, and that's a real potpourri category. We have credit certificates, we have upper level, lower level, graduate, undergraduate, which all have very different dynamics to them. Extended ed certificates, client certificates, there's a lot in there, some being credit, some being academic, some being non-academic, but we've at least identified them. We have discipline-related honors programs as a kind of type. So these are, you might be an English major, but for students with some level of performance, you can actually enter that program's honors version where you're completing some additional thesis work or other typical courses that fit with that. Living and learning programs have been identified. So these, I think most of our campuses have some type of living learning modeled programs, and they have different kinds of needs and trackings than a normal program does. And in some cases, we do have these concepts of modular and clustered courses, which, interestingly enough, if you kind of abstract it out to the concept of programs, you could actually use some of the program-styled structures to support and manage some of these more complex, longer courses that go over time. So I just kind of put that there as an example. So looking at the logical model, I think this is important to understand the way we approached program and Kuali students. We really tried to switch angles and not look at this from a student perspective. Because from a student perspective, what do the students see? They see Bachelor of Arts in Soc, Bachelor of Science in this, or combinations of this, that, and the other. But curriculum management's not a student-focused module. This is about helping the institution manage its curriculum. So what we kind of did, we spun around and looked at this from more of an institutional top perspective. And to do that, we kind of had to break programs apart into its constituent pieces for us to be able to really explore the flexibility that comes with that. And one of the ways that helped to look at that was sometimes about who owned the rules for these things. That helped be a litmus for how we kind of split these things apart. So we're not just looking at a Bachelor of Science in Engineering. We can actually break that up into its constituent components. So for instance, if we look at this particular model, we could take that, well, okay, we have a Bachelor of Science in Engineering. Well, it has a credential object to it, which is the Bachelor of Science. The Bachelor of Science has certain requirements to it and is governed not by the department, but governed by the institution and the Senate. So that has your, say, 120 credits total required, your GPA requirement, your residency requirement, how many credits have to be taken natively in your last year of the program. There's all these things that are actually completely independent of the program. These are actually institutionally mandated rules that fit with that Bachelor of Science. Then if we also look at that engineering program, it has a general education set of requirements, and that's something that all undergraduates take. Regardless of what program you're in, the way you complete that program may differ based on the program you're in, but the general set of requirements are the same across. So we kind of model that out differently, and then you see the kind of general education or course set. And then of course we have a major. So, all right, engineering, say it's electrical engineering, that's our major discipline, and that's perhaps a set of 52 credits of requirements to that to kind of make up that engineering program. And we kind of combine those together. And we can see this baccalaureate. To get this baccalaureate, you have to have at least one gen ed completed, and you have to have at least one major discipline completed to do that. And that major discipline could have different variations in electrical engineering. So you may have those out as well that a person can be related to. So then we looked at minors and, say, these discipline-related honors that you see at the bottom. These are definitely related to the baccalaureate, but not related to the program. For a baccalaureate, you can have a minor, and it could be a minor in English. It's not really related to that particular one, and you can have that, and that's part of the baccalaureate experience. And same with departmental honors. So obviously these are configurable, but from a Maryland model, you do not have to be in the program for which you're in the honors program for. You can actually go across and do other types of things. But you could obviously configure that in a different way to kind of attach it to your major discipline. But the point being, you kind of broke things apart. So it's not just one program of study object. We kind of broke that apart into its pieces to kind of allow for some more flexibility there. And with all of those, we have program rules that you can create on them. We've classified in about 3 different families of rules. We have entrance rules that might dictate what are the things the system needs to know about you to validate you can get into this thing. Perhaps there are all students need to enter this program, need to have completed these 4 requirements, or must have been, have a certain GPA, or must have a certain credit level to enter this. These are things that would be the entrance requirements. Or one requirement might be that you have to have successfully processed through an admission selective cycle. We have satisfactory progress types of requirements. So this applies, if you think of it from the baccalaureate level, you're kind of talking about your retention policies, your probation dismissal policies that your institution runs. As applied to a major discipline, you might be talking about what we classically call benchmarks, or what some institutions call progression, as you move from one year of that program to the next. Or for somebody like Maryland, we might have certain benchmarks at certain credit layers, where at the point you hit 45 credits, you either accomplish this amount of work or we kick you. And of course, completion requirements. So these are more akin to what one thinks about when we think about degree audit. I mean, what are the things that one has to have completed to earn the program? So these are not degree audit styled program completion requirements. These are more designed to how we would display them and publish them to a user. For instance, in the catalog, or we think sometimes of the advising sheets that advisors use. It's kind of more akin to that. And these, of course, all relate to courses. And again, getting back to that big picture of curriculum management, having these connections allows us to get a better understanding of the impact of courses and programs and how they relate to one another. The last little bit to talk about, so we talked earlier about this issue of the canonical learning unit, which we call our catalog course, and our learning unit instance, which is our course offering. Well, that fundamental model is also part of program as well. But in program, it's been a bit more of a challenging conversation than it has been in course. Course, we all get it. I mean, course, perfect. Program, it's been interesting to see how in some instances it works great, in others it doesn't. So it's something that we're going to see as we play with enrollment. To give an example, when we think of this concept of, well, I have this catalog version of my program, and now I have potentially multiple offerings by time, and maybe even by place. If we think about, say, some of our more entrepreneurial programs, they fit perfect. I know for like Berkeley and Maryland, we both have executive MBA programs. They are 16-month programs. They start one up about every 4 months. And one starts, they grab the students that they're going to put into it. They're in that 16-month program, and the train goes, and they're off. And in 16 months, they complete that program. The courses are all planned out. They're all set up. They're all scheduled, 16 months out, ready to go. And that works really well, because you can take the MBA off the shelf, create your train, send it off, and 4 months later you send another one off, and you send another one off, and these things keep going. But what dictates completion is not the student. This is all about the program. The program will end in 16 months, and if you're not on that train, you're not completing that program. That program will end. If there's something to be done with you, you get moved onto another train, and you follow the next day program to try to complete things out. So in that example, the program offering idea works really well. It's a little bit more of a mind game when we start playing with our traditional programs. When we think about like a traditional undergraduate program, like say sociology, They don't have trains. It's more buckets. All right, they have a sociology major, and, every week they have students who change majors into sociology, and every week they have majors who change out and move into another program, or every semester they graduate, or every semester new students are admitted to the school and come into sociology. It's more of a bucket idea. It's not the idea of having, well, I have a new program I'm going to create every 4 months or every semester. Just doesn't really become practical in that sense. So that's an area where we've kind of found we've got to play with it a little bit. And some of that often feels redundant in that, well, I have my catalog program of SOCH, and I have my one instance of SOCH. And it starts to feel like a one-to-one redundancy, but, so I just wanted to kind of throw that out to people to think about. We'll be playing with that even more as we get deeper into analysis and enrollment. Yay, done. How did I do on time?
2 minutes to spare.
See, I used, yep, Carol.
Thank you, Dan. That was as engaging and as informative as and I knew the executive MBA would come up. Never a presentation goes by without hearing about the executive MBA. Okay, we are at our break. So just to understand, what we've covered so far is just basically introduction to the project, to Kuali in general and Kuali student in particular. We talked about the functional framework for enrollment, and then we backed up a little bit to understand curriculum management insofar as it relates to enrollment. What's going to happen after the break, and again, everybody, please stay connected so we don't have to spend 10 minutes getting everybody reconnected, is Steve Barnhart is going to walk through the 10 functional areas of enrollment that we've identified and give you a sense of what's included in these areas, because some of them are kind of self-evident. Other ones probably need a little bit more explanation. So he's just going to make sure that everybody understands what's in and out of those functional areas. And then Kathy will talk about services, and then we'll have an overview of our application map, and then we'll wrap up. So please be ready to begin at 2 p.m., which is 11 a.m. West Coast. Okay, great. Thank you. So just mute your phones, but don't hang up.